My husband abandoned me in the middle of nowhere as a joke, and his cousins filmed the whole thing like it was the funniest prank they'd ever pulled. I can still hear their laughter echoing across that empty desert highway as the truck drove away, leaving me standing there with nothing but a backpack and a dying phone. That was the moment I stopped being the woman who stayed quiet. That was the moment everything changed. But let me tell you where they're watching from right now, because if you've ever felt invisible, disposable, or like someone's punchline, you need to hear the story. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're tuning in from. And if stories like this, real stories about people who rebuilt themselves from nothing, speak to you, check the description box below. There's more where this came from, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Actually, before I go any further, do me one favor. If you've ever been left behind, literally or figuratively, by someone who was supposed to love you, hit that subscribe button. Because this isn't just my story. It's for everyone who's ever been underestimated. My name is Sarah, and for 12 years, I was married to a man named Brett Thompson. We met when I was 26, fresh out of a small-town life in rural Pennsylvania, working as a receptionist at a car dealership where he came in to lease a truck. He was charming in that easy, confident way that some men have, the kind that makes you feel like you're the only person in the room. He had sandy blonde hair, a crooked smile, and this laugh that seemed to promise adventure. I fell hard and fast, the way you do when you're young and haven't yet learned that charm and character aren't the same thing. We got married 8 months later in a little chapel outside Harrisburg. My parents thought it was too soon, but I didn't care. Brett made me feel alive. He worked in construction management, moving from job site to job site, and I followed him everywhere, from Pennsylvania to North Carolina to Arizona. I gave up friendships, career opportunities, stability. I told myself it was romantic. I told myself that's what love looked like. By the time I hit 38, we'd settled in a suburb outside Phoenix. Brett's career had taken off. He was managing large commercial projects, making good money, and spending most of his free time with his cousins, Danny and Kevin Thompson. Those two were his best friends, his brothers in everything but blood. They'd grown up together in the same Pennsylvania town, played football together in high school, and moved out west around the same time we did. They were loud, always joking, always pushing boundaries. I learned early on that when Brett was with them, I became background noise. I should have seen the warning signs sooner. The way Brett would dismiss my opinions in front of them. The way he'd laugh when they made jokes at my expense, jokes about my weight, my cooking, the way I dressed. "Come on, Sarah, don't be so sensitive," he'd say. "We're just having fun." And because I loved him, because I'd built my entire life around him, I swallowed my hurt and tried to laugh along. But the truth is, I wasn't laughing. I was shrinking. Every year, I became a little smaller, a little quieter, a little more invisible. I stopped voicing my needs. I stopped setting boundaries. I became the woman who existed to support Brett's life, Brett's career, Brett's friendships. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself that once things settled down, once he wasn't so stressed, he'd see me again. I was wrong. The breaking point came on a Friday in late June. Brett announced that he, Danny, and Kevin were planning a guys' weekend, a camping trip up north near the Grand Canyon. I didn't mind. I was used to being left behind. But then, the night before they were supposed to leave, Brett came into the kitchen where I was cleaning up dinner and said, "Hey, why don't you come with us? It'll be fun." I was surprised. Brett never invited me to his guys' trips. But I was also desperate for any sign that he still wanted me around, that I still mattered. So I said yes. I packed a bag that night, excited in a way I hadn't been in years. Maybe this was the reset we needed. Maybe this trip would remind him why he married me. We left early Saturday morning in Brett's truck, a big Ford F-250 he was unreasonably proud of. Danny and Kevin followed in Kevin's Jeep. The plan was to drive up through the high desert, camp for a night near the canyon, and head back Sunday. It was a long drive, about 5 hours, through stretches of highway where you could go 30 or 40 miles without seeing another car. For the first couple hours, things were fine. Brett was in a good mood, singing along to country music on the radio, cracking jokes. I let myself relax. I let myself believe that maybe I'd been overthinking everything. Maybe we were okay. But then, about 3 hours in, we stopped at a gas station in the middle of nowhere, one of those tiny, sun-bleached places with 2 pumps and a convenience store that looked like it hadn't been updated since 1987. The kind of place where the heat shimmers off the asphalt and the only sound is the wind. Danny and Kevin pulled up beside us, and the 3 of them went inside to grab drinks and snacks. I stayed in the truck, scrolling through my phone, trying to find a signal. When they came back, something had shifted. I could see it in the way they were grinning at each other, in the way Brett's eyes had that mischievous glint I'd learned to distrust. "Hey, Sarah," he said, leaning against the truck. "We were thinking, you know what would be funny." My stomach tightened. "What?" "What if we just left you here? Just for like 20 minutes. See how long it takes you to figure out what's happening." I stared at him. "That's not funny, Brett." Danny laughed, this big, obnoxious bark of a laugh. "Oh, come on, Sarah. Where's your sense of humor?" "Seriously," I said, my voice sharper now. "Don't." But Brett was already climbing into the driver's seat. Kevin had his phone out, filming. "This is gonna be hilarious," he said. And then, before I could fully process what was happening, Brett started the truck. I jumped out, my heart pounding, thinking he'd stop. Thinking this was just a stupid bluff. But he didn't stop. He put it in gear and started driving. Slowly at first, like he was still joking. But then faster. And Danny and Kevin were right behind him in the Jeep, both of them howling with laughter, Kevin still filming out the window. I stood there in the parking lot of that gas station, watching them drive away. Watching my husband, the man I'd spent 12 years of my life loving, leave me behind like I was nothing. Like I was a punchline. I waited for them to turn around. I waited for 20 minutes, then 30, then an hour. They didn't come back. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely, you know exactly how I felt in that moment. If you do, leave a comment and let me know. I read every single one. And if you haven't already, check the description box below for more stories about people who found their strength in the darkest moments. I sat on the curb outside that gas station for 2 hours before I accepted that they weren't coming back. The sun was brutal, beating down on my shoulders, and I could feel my skin starting to burn. My phone had 1 bar of service, but when I tried to call Brett, it went straight to voicemail. I tried Danny. Same thing. Kevin didn't even have my number saved. I went inside the convenience store, my hands shaking, and asked the clerk if there was a bus station nearby, a taxi service, anything. He looked at me with a mix of pity and suspicion. A middle-aged woman, alone, clearly distressed, in the middle of the desert. "Ma'am, the nearest town with any real services is about 60 miles east," he said. "There's no public transit out here. Your best bet is to call someone to come get you." But I didn't have anyone to call. My parents were back in Pennsylvania, too far away to help. I had no close friends in Arizona. I'd lost touch with most of them over the years, too busy following Brett from place to place. I tried calling Brett again, and again, and again. Nothing. Finally, around 4 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Brett. "Relax. We're coming back. It was just a joke. Just a joke." Those 3 words made something inside me crack wide open. Not break, crack. Like the first fracture in a dam before the whole thing gives way. They showed up an hour later, still laughing, still filming. Brett pulled into the gas station with this big, goofy grin on his face, like he expected me to be relieved, maybe even grateful. Danny and Kevin were in hysterics. "Oh man, you should have seen your face when we drove off," Danny said, climbing out of the Jeep. "Priceless." I didn't say anything. I got into the truck, buckled my seatbelt, and stared straight ahead. Brett glanced at me, his smile faltering slightly. "Come on, Sarah. Don't be mad. It was funny." I still didn't speak. I didn't trust myself, too. Because if I opened my mouth, I knew what would come out wouldn't be words. It would be a scream. It would be 12 years of swallowed anger and humiliation and loneliness pouring out all at once, and I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. We drove back to Phoenix in silence. Well, Brett, Danny, and Kevin talked and laughed the whole way, but I was silent. And with every mile, I felt something inside me hardening, calcifying. I realized, sitting in that truck, that I didn't love Brett anymore. Maybe I hadn't for a long time. Maybe I'd just been too afraid to admit it. When we got home that night, I went straight to the bedroom and locked the door. Brett knocked a few times, asking if I was okay, but I didn't answer. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and I made a decision. I was done. I was done being the joke. I was done being invisible. I was done with Brett Thompson. But I didn't leave right away. I needed a plan. I needed money, resources, a place to go. So I stayed. I played the part of the dutiful wife, while I quietly started pulling my life apart from his. I opened a separate bank account and started funneling money into it. Small amounts at first, so he wouldn't notice. I reached out to an old college friend, Emma, who lived in Seattle, and asked if I could stay with her for a while. She said yes without hesitation. It took me 3 months to get everything in order. 3 months of pretending everything was fine while I dismantled the life we'd built. Brett didn't notice. He was too busy with work, with Danny and Kevin, with his own world. I'd become so invisible to him that he didn't even see me packing my things, piece by piece, into boxes I hid in the garage. I left on a Tuesday morning in early October while Brett was at work. I loaded everything I cared about into my old Honda Civic, clothes, books, photos, my grandmother's jewelry. I left a note on the kitchen counter. It said, "I'm done being your joke. Don't contact me. Sarah." And then I drove away. I didn't look back. Not once. The divorce was ugly. Brett fought me on everything. The house, the savings, even my car. He tried to paint me as unstable, as someone who'd abandoned him without cause. But I had a good lawyer, a woman named Janet who believed me, who saw through Brett's charm to the cruelty underneath. We settled after 6 months. I got half of our savings in my car. He got the house and his precious truck. I moved to Seattle and stayed with Emma for a few months while I figured out what came next. I got a job as an office manager for a physical therapy clinic, and slowly I started rebuilding. I started going to therapy. I started exercising, not to lose weight or to look a certain way, but because it made me feel strong. I started saying no to things I didn't want to do. I started saying yes to things that scared me. And somewhere along the way, I realized I was happy. For the first time in over a decade, I was genuinely happy. I joined a gym, a small, no-frills place near my apartment called Ironwolf Fitness. It was the kind of gym where people actually worked out, not just posed for Instagram photos. I started going 3 times a week, then 5. I learned to lift weights. I learned to push my body in ways I never thought possible. And I met people, real people who became friends, who became my community. People who saw me. One of them was a trainer named Lisa. She was in her early 40s, tall and muscular, with short gray hair and a no-nonsense attitude. She took me under her wing, taught me proper form, encouraged me when I wanted to quit. "You're stronger than you think, Sarah," she'd say. And slowly, I started to believe her. By the time 4 years had passed, I barely recognized the woman I used to be. I was 42, living in a city I loved, doing work that mattered, surrounded by people who valued me. I'd gained muscle, confidence, self-respect. I'd built a life that was entirely mine. And then, on a rainy Thursday afternoon in November, Brett walked into my gym. If you're still with me, drop a like and check the description box for more stories like this one. Trust me, you'll want to see where this goes. I didn't see him at first. I was in the middle of a set of deadlifts, headphones in, focused on my form. But Lisa, who was spotting me, suddenly went still. "Sarah," she said quietly, nodding toward the entrance. "Isn't that?" I turned, and there he was, Brett Thompson, standing just inside the door, looking around like he owned the place. He was heavier than I remembered, his face puffier, his hair thinning. He was wearing gym clothes, expensive-looking athletic where that looked brand new, and he had that same cocky smirk I used to know so well. For a second, I couldn't breathe. It felt like being thrown back in time, like the past 4 years had never happened. But then I saw the way he was scanning the room, and I realized he didn't recognize me. He was looking right past me, his eyes sliding over me like I was just another stranger. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't the same woman he'd left on that highway. I was stronger now, literally and figuratively. My hair was shorter, my body was different, my whole presence was different. I wasn't invisible anymore. I watched as he walked up to the front desk and started talking to the receptionist, a young guy named Tyler. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I saw Brett gesture vaguely around the gym, saw Tyler nod and point toward the free weights section. Brett was probably asking about membership options, trying to charm his way into a good deal. Classic Brett. Lisa leaned in close. You want me to say something? I can tell him to leave. I shook my head. No. Let him stay. I want to see what he does. I went back to my workout, but I kept Brett in my peripheral vision. He wandered over to the bench press area, started loading up a bar with more weight than he could realistically handle. Typical. He always cared more about looking strong than being strong. About 20 minutes later, I was doing pull-ups when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Damn, that's impressive. I dropped from the bar and turned. Brett was standing there, hands on his hips, looking at me with a mix of surprise and, was that attraction? My stomach turned. Thanks, I said flatly, reaching for my water bottle. He stepped closer. You must come here a lot, huh? You look like you know what you're doing. I took a slow sip of water, studying him. He still didn't recognize me. How was that possible? How had I been married to this man for 12 years, and he couldn't even recognize my face? I do, I said. Been training here for about 4 years. He grinned. Nice. I just moved to the area. Thought I'd check out some local gyms. This one seems cool. You moved here? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. From where? Phoenix, he said. Just got transferred for work. Construction management. Of course. Brett had always been good at landing on his feet. Interesting, I said. What made you pick Seattle? He shrugged. New opportunities, fresh start, you know how it is. Plus, I just got out of a complicated situation. Figured a change of scenery would be good. I bet. Complicated how? He hesitated, like he was deciding how much to share with a stranger. You know. Divorce. It was messy. My ex-wife just left one day. Totally out of nowhere. Didn't even give me a real reason. I felt a flicker of rage, hot and sharp. Out of nowhere. No real reason. As if abandoning me on a highway was nothing. As if 12 years of dismissing and belittling me was nothing. That sounds rough, I said, my voice carefully even. Must have been hard for you. Yeah, it was. But honestly, he leaned in, lowering his voice like we were sharing a secret. I'm better off without her. She was always so serious. No sense of humor. Couldn't take a joke. Couldn't take a joke. There it was again. That phrase that had haunted me for years. I felt Lisa appear at my side, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder, a silent show of support. Brett glanced at Lisa, then back at me. Anyway, I didn't mean to unload on you. I'm Brett, by the way. Sarah, I said. For a split second, something flickered in his eyes. A moment of recognition, maybe or doubt. But then it passed, and he stuck out his hand. Nice to meet you, Sarah. I didn't take his hand. I just looked at it, hanging there between us, and then I looked back at his face. Actually, Brett, I said slowly, we've already met. His smile faltered. We have. Yeah, about 12 years ago. At a car dealership in Pennsylvania. I watched as the confusion on his face slowly shifted to shock. His eyes widened, his mouth opened slightly, and the color drained from his cheeks. Sarah, he whispered. Sarah. Thompson. Not Thompson anymore, I said. I took back my maiden name. It's Sarah Mitchell now. He took a step back, his hand dropping to his side. Oh my God. I didn't recognize you. You look so different. I finished. Yeah, I know. Turns out when you stop living your life for someone else, you actually start living. He was speechless. Actually speechless. Brett Thompson, the man who always had a joke ready, who always had something to say, stood there staring at me like I was a ghost. And then, slowly, his shock started to shift into something else. Defensiveness. Look, Sarah, I know things ended badly between us, but... Badly. I interrupted. Brett, you left me stranded on a highway in the middle of nowhere as a joke. Your cousins filmed it. You thought it was hilarious. His face reddened. That was a mistake. We were just messing around. We came back. 2 hours later, I said. After I sat there, alone, thinking you might never come back. After I realized that the man I'd spent 12 years loving thought so little of me that he could abandon me like trash and call it funny. People were starting to notice. A few gym members had stopped their workouts, glancing over. Lisa stood firm beside me, Her arms crossed, her expression cold. Brett lowered his voice. Okay, fine. That was wrong. I admit it. But you didn't have to leave the way you did. You didn't even try to. I left because I deserved better, I said. And you know what? I found it. I found better. I found myself. He looked around, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. Can we talk about this somewhere private? No, I said simply. There's nothing left to say. You wanted a fresh start in Seattle? Great. But stay away from me. Stay away from my gym. Stay away from my life. And then I turned my back on him and walked away. Lisa followed, along with a few other regulars who'd become my friends. People who'd been there for me, who'd seen me grow. We moved to the other side of the gym, and I picked up where I'd left off, my hands shaking slightly as I gripped the pull-up bar. Behind me, I heard Brett's footsteps retreating. I heard the door open and close, and then he was gone. Lisa squeezed my shoulder. You okay? I nodded, surprised to find that I was. I was more than okay. I was free. Make sure to check the description box below for more stories about second chances and standing your ground. Brett didn't come back to the gym. I heard through Tyler, the receptionist, that Brett had called the next day to cancel the membership inquiry he'd started. Apparently, he decided to join a different gym across town. Good. I didn't want to waste another second of my life thinking about him. But the truth is, I did think about him. Not in the way I used to, not with longing or hurt. I thought about him the way you think about a scar, something that used to hurt, that changed you, but doesn't control you anymore. Seeing him again had been jarring, but it had also been clarifying. It had shown me, in the starkest possible way, how far I'd come. The woman Brett had left on that highway 4 years ago would have crumbled seeing him again. She would have apologized, maybe, or tried to explain herself, or worse, she would have taken him back. But I wasn't that woman anymore. That woman was gone. I'd buried her in the miles of highway between Arizona and Seattle, in the hours of therapy, in the weight room at Iron Will Fitness. I'd built someone new in her place. Someone stronger. A few days after the confrontation, Lisa invited me to coffee. We sat in a little cafe near the gym, rain pattering against the windows, and she looked at me with that direct, assessing gaze she had. How are you really doing? She asked. I thought about it. I'm good, I said. And I meant it. Honestly, seeing him was weirdly satisfying. He didn't recognize me at first. He looked right at me and didn't see me. And when he finally did recognize me, when he saw who I'd become, he had no idea what to say. He had no power over me. None. Lisa smiled. That's because you took it back. You took your power back, Sarah. And you did it without him, without his permission, without waiting for him to validate you. That's huge. She was right. For so long, I'd measure my worth by how Brett saw me, or didn't see me. I'd let him define who I was. But somewhere in the past 4 years, I'd stopped doing that. I'd started defining myself. And the woman I'd become, the woman who could deadlift 200 pounds, who had a job she loved, who had real friends, who knew her own mind, that woman didn't need Brett's approval. She didn't need anyone's approval. A week later, I got a message on Facebook. It was from Danny, Brett's cousin, the one who'd been driving the Jeep that day, who'd filmed the whole thing. The message was short. Hey Sarah, Brett told me he ran into you. Look, I know this is way overdue, but I'm sorry about what we did that day. It was messed up. We were idiots. I hope you're doing okay. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let Danny sit with his guilt the way I'd sat with my humiliation. But another part of me, the part that had worked so hard to let go of anger, wanted to respond. So I did. Thanks for the apology, Danny. It means something, even if it's 4 years late. I'm doing more than okay. I hope you guys grew up a little. He responded almost immediately. We did. Or at least I did. Kevin and I don't really talk to Brett anymore. He's not a good guy, Sarah. I don't know if he ever was. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. I closed the message without responding. I didn't need to hear about Brett's life, about whether he'd changed or stayed the same. It didn't matter. He was a chapter I'd closed, and I wasn't interested in reopening it. Life moved on. Winter turned to spring. I got promoted at work. I started dating again. Nothing serious, just casual coffee dates and dinners, learning to be vulnerable again. I took a solo trip to Vancouver, something I never would have done when I was married. I stood on the seawall, looking out at the ocean, and felt a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. And then, about 6 months after I'd seen Brett at the gym, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Hello, Sarah. It's Janet, my divorce lawyer." I hadn't spoken to her in over 3 years. "Janet, hi. Is everything okay?" She hesitated. "I'm calling because I thought you should know. Brett contacted me last week. He wanted to know if there was any way to reopen the divorce settlement." My heart skipped. "What? Why?" "He's in financial trouble, apparently. Lost his job, burned through his savings. He was hoping to get some of the money back that he gave you in the settlement." I felt a surge of something, not quite satisfaction, but close. "And what did you tell him?" I told him absolutely not. The settlement is final and legally binding. There's nothing he can do. "But Sarah, he also asked for your contact information." I didn't give it to him, obviously, but I wanted to warn you in case he tries to reach out. "Thanks, Janet. I appreciate it." After I hung up, I sat with the news. Brett, the man who'd left me with nothing, who treated me like a joke, was now the one struggling. And I felt nothing. Not joy, not pity, not anger. Just a kind of distant neutrality. His life wasn't my concern anymore. His problems weren't mine to fix or gloat over. He was just a stranger now, someone I used to know. Brett never did reach out. I heard through the grapevine. Emma had a mutual friend who'd moved to Phoenix, that he'd moved back to Arizona after a few months, tail between his legs. Apparently, Seattle hadn't been the fresh start he'd hoped for. But I didn't dig for details. I didn't need to know. What I needed was to keep moving forward. And I did. By the time I turned 45, 3 years after that day at the gym, I'd built a life I was proud of. I'd moved into my own apartment, a small one-bedroom with big windows that let in the Seattle light. I'd been promoted to clinic director. I'd run my first half marathon. I'd fallen in love again, not with a man, but with my own life, with my own strength. I still think about that day on the highway sometimes. I think about the woman I was, standing there in the heat, watching her husband drive away. I think about how small she felt, how worthless. And I wish I could go back and tell her what I know now, that being left behind was the best thing that ever happened to her. That the joke was on them, not her. That she was about to become someone they could never have imagined. Because the truth is, Brett and Danny and Kevin didn't break me. They set me free. They showed me who they really were, and in doing so, they forced me to figure out who I really was. And the woman I became, strong, independent, unbreakable, she's worth every mile of that long, lonely highway. If my story resonated with you, if you've ever had to rebuild yourself from nothing, drop a comment below and let me know. Share your story. And please, check the description box below for more stories like this. Real stories about real people who found their strength when everything fell apart. Subscribe if you haven't already, because these stories matter. Your story matters. And to anyone out there who's been left behind, who's been treated like a joke, who's been made to feel invisible, you're not. You never were. The people who couldn't see your worth, that's their failure, not yours. You are enough. You always were. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Keep moving forward.